Delighted to see you all returned to hear the rest of my balloon tale. Um, when I left you yesterday, I had just related of the remarkable voyage made by Monsieur de Rosier and the Marquis d'Arland in the Montgolfier's great 75-foot high hot air balloon. Now, we began, however, speaking of the other gentleman, Jacques Charles, and the hydrogen or inflammable air balloon that he flew from the field of Mars in August of 1783. Now, he had not been idle in all the months after, and only 10 days after the Montgolfier's accomplishment, Monsieur Charles, he launched his own manned flight. And by this time, all of Paris was enraged to see it. This has become the great thing that concerned everyone. Now, I, of course, was desirous of seeing this. It was not conducted so conveniently to my house as some of the earlier ones had been. This new creation, this new machine, was to ascend from the Jardin des Tuileries, more to the center of Paris, and some distance away. But I purchased, at the price of a crown, a place in the special enclosure near the launching place that I might see it close up. And I set off early in the morning to make my way to the Tuileries that I might see it. What I had not counted upon was the fact that all of Paris was going in the same direction. It seemed that not only all the people of Paris, but indeed of all the surrounding towns and villages were all pouring into the city to see this great demonstration of flight. Thus the roads were clogged and our motion was very slow. And of course, I also underestimated how much I would be discommoded by the jolting of the carriage on the cobblestones between my gout and the stone that I suffer from. And by the time we reached the Tuileries, I was not feeling at my best. It was damp and cloudy. There had been a heavy fall of dew, and I knew not how long I should have to stand about waiting in the enclosure for the actual event. So in the end, I simply had my coach positioned in a convenient spot, and I was determined to watch all the proceedings from the comfort of my own coach, even though it meant not being quite so close to the machine as I should have liked to have been. The city itself was a spectacle. The streets were filled. The bridges were covered with people. The rooftops were covered with people. Every balcony was filled. A rather ingenious mathematician has calculated that some 400,000 of people were gathered together to see the ascension of Monsieur Charles' balloon. And I don't doubt it, just from my own observation, that there were that many. 400,000, that's 1/60th part of the entire population of France, all gathered for this. Never was a philosophical experiment attended so magnificently. Now, they were determined to wait until the sky was somewhat clearer, and so it was not until after nearly 2 o'clock before the balloon was set off. First, they sent up a small trial balloon so that Monsieur Charles could see the direction of the wind and the strength of it at various heights. And then guns were fired to announce to the waiting populace that the great event was about to take place. And then up it went. Now, this was of a very different sort than the Montgolfier's balloon. This was more spherical. Was not nearly so large as the Montgolfier's because being filled with hydrogen or inflammable air, it need not be so big. It was only 26 feet in diameter, although a 26-foot diameter sphere required 8 times the amount of hydrogen, to use a more English pronunciation, 8 times the amount of hydrogen that the balloon in August required. So they had been days filling it. Uh, a number of improvements have been made. Now, in this case, there was a sort of a net that was wrapped over the balloon, and it was from the net that the car or gondola, I don't know which would be the best term to call it, was hung. So the car in which the aeronauts rode hung below the balloon rather than being attached to it as with the Montgolfier sort. It was all rather handsomely painted and so on. And they had a little table, they had a barometer, a thermometer, a hygrometer, all the things, the telescopes that they might measure the height to which they ascended. They devised an excellent means to control the ascent. They began with bags of sand, a considerable quantity of sand in the car, too much for the balloon to lift, and then by putting off a little sand at a time, when they reached just the point when the balloon and all its apparatus and passengers were lighter than the air, then it would begin to ascend. It would only ascend so far as it remained lighter than the ambient air. The lighter the machine, the higher it would go, you see. So they could put off just enough sand as convenient to rise to just the height that they desired. And by means of a valve, they could release some of the gas and so come down again when they wished. Now they had to make some precautions, for as they rose higher and the air became thinner, the gas inside the balloon would tend to expand. And there was always the danger, if one rose too high in such a thing, the balloon could burst. So they had to watch over that very carefully. So in the end, they rose to about 1,800 feet. That was the height they chose. And with the prevailing wind being what it was, they set off to the north-northeast from the Tuileries. Now, I had taken the precaution, which I had not done the first time, of bringing with me a small pocket glass, a little telescope, so that I could follow the journey of the balloon as long as possible. And I watched it until it finally disappeared, even with my telescope. When last I saw of it, it looked no bigger than a walnut. And when it went up, the multitude cheered. There were flags being waved and people shouting and cheering and clapping, thousands and tens of thousands of them. The aeronauts waved white pennants from their car at the crowd, which delighted all. And so, in a triumphal manner, off they went. Horsemen had been placed on the outskirts of the city in various directions, so that whichever way the balloon went, there would be someone to pursue it, and hence to assist in bringing it to Earth when the time came. In the end, this balloon sailed aloft for 2 hours and covered 24 miles. Imagine traveling 24 miles overland in 2 hours and in complete comfort. I suppose a man with a relay of good horses could conceivably do that, but only with great difficulty. And so it was with those horses that pursued it. You know, something I forgot to tell you last time, which of course I think was not so much a concern this time, but the first balloon that Monsieur Charles sent up, the one in August, well, when it came down at Genos, a village outside of Paris, it came down in the midst of a lot of peasants who were working in the field. It didn't come down with a thump, it came down in a very gentle manner and then bounded along the ground, you see. This so terrified the peasants and the country people that they gathered in a large number. They attacked it with pitchforks and knives, persuaded that it was either some sort of monster itself or there was some sort of terrible beast concealed within it. Fortunate for them, given the nature of inflammable air, they did not bring torches or they might have had a very unpleasant surprise when they rendered that envelope. But by this time, I don't think there was any fear of that. The word had gone out since August. All the countryside now knew, at least in principle, about balloons, though few had ever seen one. So there was little fear that this balloon would be treated so violently upon its descent, or its occupants be thought to be some strange and threatening presence. As I say, the balloon traveled for 2 hours and traversed 24 miles before at last coming down. And I think the only reason that they did come down, though they could have stayed aloft much longer, was that the sun was beginning to set. You see, this is December 1st. And Paris is farther north than you might imagine, farther north than most parts of America. And that time of year, the sun set at 4 o'clock. So as the sun was setting, they valved out some gas, and down the balloon came, to be greeted by all the country people who had gathered round when they saw it coming, and eventually the horsemen caught up, and all were received with great acclaim. And the balloon held down and sufficiently waited. But Monsieur Charles was not done, not done. They had accomplished their purpose, but he had one other notion in mind, and he would have one other ascension before he called it a day, as it were. And so he climbed into the car alone, put off some of the ballast, and ordered it released. He wanted to see how high the balloon might rise. Now, as some of the gas had been released, he presumed that he would be able to tell when it became dangerously distended, and so prevent any misadventures. But still, it was a courageous thing to do. It was quite dark by the time he went up. But he succeeded in rising to a height of 10,000 feet above the earth. So high, in fact, that he could see the sun again, and observe it from that great height. So that when he came down again, as he did very soon, did not stay there very long, he was, I believe, the first man in all the history of the world to see the sun set twice on the same day. Of course, he returned to Paris a hero, and no one knew precisely who should be acclaimed more. Monsieur Charles, who had made such a longer journey and had obtained such a great height, or the Montgolfiers, whose balloon was the first and, of course, the largest and most impressive looking that so many in Paris had seen. And yet, for all that, for all the wonder of these two remarkable voyages, there was one other invention that December that I think worthy of mention. And that was an invention of a young man, Louis Sébastien Lenormand. He was not in Paris, he was down in the south, and at Montpellier. And he had a curious notion. He had once leapt from a tree, I think it was, while holding two large umbrellas. And he found that he did not strike the ground nearly so hard as he expected, considering the height of his jump, because of those two umbrellas. And so he had a notion. He constructed a sort of giant parasol, 14 feet wide, 14 feet in diameter. He climbed to the top of the observatory tower in Montpellier, 85 feet high, and with his immense parasol, leapt from the top of the building. Of course, One should expect him to have been dashed to pieces on the stones below, but in fact, while he landed with a good thump, he came to no harm. He believed that his invention, this giant parasol, might be the means by which persons could escape from burning buildings, for example, when there was no other egress. Monsieur Montgolfier, Joseph Montgolfier, was present to see this demonstration at Montpellier, and he was impressed with this device, and he saw it as a possible means by which an aeronaut could escape from a burst or burning balloon. Monsieur Lenormand christened this thing, well, the ones we are used to are called parasols because they're there to protect us from the sun. This was to protect a man from falling, and so he called it a parachute. And so the very fact that the parachute and the balloon, the flying balloon, the air balloon, put it that way, were both invented in the same year seems almost a provision of divine providence, doesn't it? Well, all of this made balloons the rage. Everything was balloons. Chairs were made with balloon-shaped backs to them. The friseurs of Paris designed balloon coiffures for the ladies to wear. Snuff boxes and prints and fabrics with pictures of balloons on them became all the rage. And everyone became interested in this remarkable invention. And in the months that followed, there were many, many other experiments, not all of them perfectly successful. The fellow at Bordeaux, for example, he designed a balloon, collected money from all his neighbors and all the people of the city so that they might witness this marvel, and then he couldn't make it fly. The mob was so angry, they tore his house down. The Montgolfiers constructed an immense balloon in January of '84, 120 feet high, with which they took up a party of, one of the Montgolfiers went to operate the machine, and then with 6 passengers. So a company of 7 rose in this. Unfortunately, it caught fire. It was necessary to slash it and release some of the hot air and bring it down to earth before any ill came to the passengers. But that must be considered simply an unfortunate misadventure. In the spring, 4 ladies, yes, 4 ladies ascended in Paris in a tethered balloon. And in June, in fact, on the anniversary of the first balloon flown by the Montgolfiers in their own hometown in Ardennais, on the 4th of June, a balloon christened La Gustave flew over the rooftops of Lyon. You see, with the goddess Minerva sending down music from above. What I mean is that King Gustavus III of Sweden was visiting France, and he had gone to Lyon with King Louis and Marie Antoinette, his wife. And there they were entertained by a well-known young woman, a singer and actress named Elizabeth Teeb, who, released in a balloon, dressed in the costume of Minerva, sailed over their heads while they were being entertained in a garden, and she sang an ode to King Gustav from a balloon named in his honor as part of the entertainment. Let me see, my memory isn't what it used to be. Oh yes, in June of that year, the Roberts attempted to create a balloon that could be directed as to the direction it flew, a dirigible balloon, to use the word. This was made on an elongated pattern with rudders and great oars or paddles, which they hoped they might propel it through the air. I'm afraid all their efforts at direction failed. and they nearly came to grief too when the balloon began to ascend uncontrollably. They at last reached a height of some 15,000 feet. They nearly froze to death. They could scarcely breathe at that height. The air was so thin. And in the end, they also were compelled to slash the balloon to let out enough of the gas that they might return safely to the Earth. So by no means is this new device perfected. There is a great deal that must yet be done. The first balloon was flown in England in September, and in fact, not long thereafter, I think it was in January of the year after. Yes, it was in January of the year after. My family was somewhat concerned. Jean-Pierre Blanchard, who had flown once in Paris, had gone to England. He'd flown a balloon there. And in January, he and the first man born in America at least, to fly in a balloon, Dr. John Jeffries, the two of them determined to cross the English Channel, sail from England to France through the air. Now, Dr. Jeffries was an acquaintance of my son, William, then living in England, and William put into his hands a letter for my grandson, William's son, Temple, who was living with me at Passy. With some difficulty, Dr. Jeffries and Monsieur Blanchard reached France. The letter was sent on to us, and so I have the pleasure of boasting, I, the first postmaster appointed for the United States, Postmaster General that is, that the first letter ever carried by air was from one member of my family to another, if that is worthy of being remembered. I will close with one unfortunate incident. Another attempt was made to cross the Channel, this time from France to England, by none other than Jean-Francois Pilatre de Rosier, who had been in that first hot air balloon. In this case, it was a composite balloon of his own design. It had, there were two compartments within it, one which he filled with hydrogen, and the other which was to be filled with hot air. Alas, something went dreadfully wrong. The thing caught fire, and Monsieur Rosier and his companion, Monsieur Romain, plunged some 6,000 feet to their deaths. So I don't wish to suggest to you, as I say, that these new devices are foolproof, nor simple, nor perfectly understood. I said once that it was like an infant. Well, now perhaps it has come to the age of a toddler, but it is certainly not yet grown. Still, what potential, what we may not see in future from these machines. Imagine great cargoes of goods being transported over land, held aloft by balloons. Imagine, even if they cannot be directed, because contrary to the wind, yet could they not be drawn along the ground by, let us say, a team of oxen? Roads impassable to carts might be traversed by teams of oxen or even horses tethered to a balloon which carried the goods over their heads. There's also talk of other things. The air is much colder at a great height. Would it not be delightful for a gentleman to keep a balloon tethered in his garden? And whenever he wished to chill his wine, he would simply send it aloft a few thousand feet to where the air is cooler, and then have the wine precisely as he wishes it. Or perhaps he might simply set up casks of water that he might have ice, even in the midst of summer, by means of such a device. The military uses also are much talked about. The way a general might be informed of the motions of armies miles distant by an observer in a balloon tethered in his camp, or messages be sent from within or without a besieged town that now would be utterly cut off from communication. Indeed, Isn't that possible that this invention of the balloon might at last persuade the princes of the earth of the folly of making war against one another? Uh, the construction of 5,000 balloons, each capable of raising 2 men and all their equipment, would not be more than the construction of, a half a dozen warships. And yet, what nation could arm itself effectively against an invasion by air? 10,000 men traveling by night on a prevailing wind to land deep within the enemy's country. What mischief could they accomplish before any force could be gathered sufficient to go against them? Merely maintaining defenses upon the frontiers of the country would no longer be sufficient. Under such circumstances, would it not be evident to all that to make war upon one another is the greatest folly? That there are no victors in such contests ever? All of this conjures up remarkable visions of the future to me. If we can do this, if we can fly, what else may we not do? Perhaps in time we shall find means to deprive great masses of their gravity so that they might easily be transported wherever we would have them. All diseases prevented or cured. The life of man extended beyond anything that we are accustomed to. Indeed, I often think that I sometimes wonder that perhaps I was born too soon. I am jealous of what our descendants, a century or two hence, will know, that the inventions that shall be created, things of which we can have no conception, may be commonplaces to our great grandchildren. The prevalence of learned academies of science now in nearly all the capitals of Europe, and I pray we may soon see them in America, with so many philosophers laboring at their researches, I have no doubt that progress will be swift and remarkable things will be accomplished. And perhaps these balloons will be the first fruit of that. We pride ourselves on the independency which America has won, and I would not gainsay its importance. It is a new epoch in the history of the world, the independency of America. A new sort of government founded in liberty and equality, unlike anything that has been seen previous. But 1,000 years hence, who shall be remembered? Dr. Franklin, who negotiated a treaty of peace like so many treaties that had preceded and followed it? Or Monsieur Montgolfier, who taught man to fly through the clouds? Well, I see I've used up the time that I allotted to this, and I would not grow tedious by being over long about it. So I shall leave you shortly. If any of you have questions, inquiries about any of the things I've spoken of, I shall be pleased to answer them as swiftly as I might in writing. Perhaps the next one of these, perhaps the next one ought to be more of a conversation. Rather than I should tell you some tale about smallpox or balloons, I should simply offer myself for your questions. Perhaps we shall try that soon. At all events, I thank you for your attendance. I pray that we may see balloons one day in America, where there's none has ever flown here yet, but I have no doubt that we shall see them in time, and who knows what else. For now, however, I bid you a good afternoon and wish you adieu.